Doing well matters to me. Succeeding really, really matters to me. And even if that means I have to work twice as hard, I'll do it.
PR, it's almost like having a superpower. I want to use that for good.
I found it was super exciting to be able to be trusted with helping a better run.
I don't think that the PR industry has many people that look like me.
And I was constantly being told it wasn't good enough. And the confusing thing was that it seemed always like it was good enough at the time.
I've had to have messages that I've written sent by people who did not look like me for them to be accepted.
It hit me like a light bulb. My face just doesn't fit. I was too ugly, too fat. My hair wasn't good enough.
They grabbed at me, they made animal noises.
Hello and welcome to another episode of ERG PowerTalk. That clip is from the opening of the trailer for the documentary film Arise Firebird. The film tells the story of three women of color who were pushed out of the corporate world due to toxic racism and sexism. It tells how they worked through their traumas and how they rebuilt their careers and their lives on their own terms. Arise Firebird is ultimately about learning to live a life that goes beyond grinning and bearing it, which is unfortunately the choice made by so many undersupported people in the workplace today. As resource group community leaders, part of your mission is to provide support and encouragement to members of your communities who are generally the ones who encounter negative workplace experiences like these. The question is, what can you do to help them and yourself? And that is the topic we'll be exploring today. And for this, I believe we've got the perfect guest with us. But before we introduce our guest, let's take a moment to review our mission and acknowledge our supporters. This is ERG PowerTalk, and I'm your host, Joe Santana. ERG PowerTalk is your 21st century virtual forum for the exchange of great ideas and inspiration for ERG leaders, as well as others interested in supporting ERGs. With ERG PowerTalk, there is no more waiting until the next conference and praying that you get the budget to travel to the conference to find great ideas and stimulation. Just subscribe and listen to thought leaders at your convenience. Before we begin, a quick note of thanks to our supporters: Elastic, Dollar General, Freighter Health and Wisconsin Medical College, Hiscox, Mass Mutual, Manpower Group, Tapestry, Federal Reserve System, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, MIT Lincoln Laboratory, Oshkosh Corporation, UL Solutions, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, let's go straight to the program. She is a dynamic, international, multi-award-winning filmmaker, TEDx speaker, and resilient storyteller who spent over 25 years cultivating expertise in engineering, operational excellence initiatives at top-tier companies like McKinsey, Shell, and Amazon. Currently, she spearheads a series of virtual executive roundtables that aim to empower senior leaders. As a visionary producer and director, her mission is to equip organizations and people with the tools needed to achieve sustained success. Through her film, which explores critical topics such as diversity, transformation, she initiates powerful conversations that inspire, change, and drive business success.
Jimi Okubanjo. I'm the director, producer of Arise Firebird. I'm also the founder of Full of Jimi Worldwide. And my vision is to help people fall in love with Mondays by helping them advocate for themselves in the workplace, but also more importantly, in their own lives.
I love that. Fall in love with Monday. That's a tough one for many people, but certainly something ambitious that we can aspire to. So, Jimi, you have a really broad career working with various top companies. I only named 3 of them, but there are several others in a variety of management roles. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life and how it led you to where you are today.
So really quickly, I think the key theme through most of the work I did was operations transformation work. A lot of that was in very technical STEM heavy engineering spaces. I think where that equipped me for the work I'm doing now was a big part of my job in all the transformations I worked and eventually led was really getting leadership to change their behavior so that they could enable this transformation to happen. And yes, they were technical. They were integrated activity planning systems. They were project engineering, portfolio efficiency projects, but we still required leadership behavior change for us to get the cultural change we needed for these new ways of working. And I find that really is something that lends itself well to the work we're doing with the Rise Firebird, because we are trying to bring in that conversation to leaders about behavior change, but also, helping use the film as a tool to start those conversations about buy-in engagement from the more senior leadership perspective. So I think ultimately, to kind of sum up my 20-something years experience, it really has been about leading organizational, very complicated and very yucky organizational change.
People think about DEI in terms of a lot of different things, but ultimately it is a big organizational change project. It involves getting people to change their behaviors and getting the organization to relate in different ways. So I could see that tie-in between what you're doing in the past in the engineering space and what you're doing now. So tell us about what you do now and the catalyst that launched you from where you were in this engineering space to focusing in this new area, which clearly is an area that you have a lot of passion for.
Well, the catalyst was a conversation. I had made it into a C-suite role. I was overseeing 3,500 people at a really well-respected organization. And I had just gotten to a point where I realized I couldn't really have the impact I needed to have. And around that time, I was in a conversation with somebody from the wider industry. And that person had said to me that they had made a very overt racist remark. And it wasn't the worst thing that had happened to me in my career, but it had gotten me to a point where I just felt really tired. And I couldn't just automatically bounce back from that, Joseph. And that was probably the trigger in terms of a succession of events that led me eventually, years later, to producing a Rise Firebird. But I just couldn't understand why I couldn't bounce back from what really was just a remark. I'd had remarks before. I'd faced physical danger and bounced back. But I couldn't bounce back from this remark. I realized now it was the accumulation of that. And I go into a bit more about some of those things in the actual movie, as well as other women's stories. So what I do now, I produced the documentary Rise Firebird. That took us a couple of years to fundraise and actually get it produced. And now we are taking that film into organizations, nonprofits, to individuals, really in two ways. One, I get to work with 12 amazing people to help them through their own career challenges. And I'm committing to just 12 people a year. But also what we're doing is we're bringing the film into organizations to help them have that conversation, whether at the leadership level, the ERG level, the HR level. So we're helping them recognize this is the cost of inaction, but also for people who go through this, to give them the language to talk about this is how it's affecting me. So they can get help, so they can ask for help. And then we also provide additional resource in terms of, how do you translate the content of a Rise Firebird into action? And we bundle all that into our film screening events so that organizations can use that information to actually translate that into doing something, whether we're talking to individuals, employee groups, the organization as a whole, or just individual allies.
What I love about the work that you're doing, just listening to you talk about it and reading some of the material around it, is that a lot of corporate work seems to focus on how do we change, let's say, a manager, or how do we make managers more aware of biases? How do we get people to perform better in these various leadership roles? But there's a flip side to this, which is what are the skills needed by people who actually are the subject in many cases of the marginalization, of the remarks, or of these different things that happen? Like, how do we arm them with what they need in order to be able to effectively to deal with all of this and thrive in environments that clearly sometimes are hostile to them, whether on purpose or not, whether it's unconscious bias or whatever, the result is the same. There's some kind of injury to the recipient. And I think that what you're doing focuses on that other side, which is a side that doesn't get as much attention. The individual who is the recipient, who is on the receiving end of some of these situations. So I love that approach. So what would you say is the common denominator that seems to be the primary thing that cumulatively holds back people of color, women, and any other undersupported group in organizations today? You mentioned some of the things that you were experiencing. You clearly were in a pretty high level position, had proven yourself. There's no doubt in your ability at that point in terms of the work that you were doing, but yet it kind of rocked your world a little bit, some of these things that were going on. What are some of the common denominators that are causing that cause people to have that moment?
I love, we talked about it, they rocked my world a little bit, and I know that was hyperbole. It devastated me, what happened. It destroyed me. And I feel that links back to the common denominator is, let's take mountain climbing an example. There are going to be challenges climbing a mountain, especially for people from traditionally underrepresented communities. But this can apply to really anybody. And you fall down that mountain, right? And you've fallen partway down. You're on this ledge, legs broken. How do you get back up? And the common denominator is there's no strategy for that. The assumption is just shake, quitters never win, winners never quit. Shake yourself up, keep climbing. No mountain climber is going to be successful. So what is the strategy? Because you're going to fall and you're going to break both your legs at some point. What is that? And there isn't one. Just don't talk about it. Don't make us feel bad by talking about it. You're complaining by talking about it. It comes to the territory. Each of those could be used for a mountain climber. Falling comes to the territory. Don't complain about it. Just shake it up. But we wouldn't say that to a mountain climber who's fallen, right? There should be protocols to help them get back up, or at least get them off the mountain, or what was something. And for me, the common denominator is when, not if, when the crisis came, there was no way to help them, I don't even think people recognize there was a crisis coming. So I'll give an example of a critical time where people really do question question themselves. The annual appraisal, the 6-monthly appraisal. For women of color, people of color, statistically, we're gonna leave that conversation disappointed. We're not going to get the promotion. We're not going to get the pay rise. We're not going to get the bonuses. And even if we get the bonus, it's not going to be as much statistically. So it's going to be a difficult time going in. We should know this. So one of the things that we do in some of our workshops is, like, we call it a pre-appraisal and a post-appraisal. So we're really being deliberate. Like, you're going to go into a space where you could come out injured. So how do you go in there psychologically, emotionally prepared? This is not just about the evidence, the type A stuff, evidence. That, of course, we do that. Tick, 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 high achievers, do all that stuff. But the other piece around the injury, what are you going to do in? What is padding looking like? What is taking extra oxygen look like going into what's probably going to be a brutal experience? Because those appraisals are not there to build people up. There are many purposes for appraisals. So but often we're gonna walk out of there feeling like we're $10. And so the post-appraisal process is, now that you've walked out of there, so you've fallen off that mountain, you've broken both your legs. Mm-hmm. We knew there was a chance that was going to happen, a very high chance that was going to happen. So what are the post-appraisal activities you're going to do? Who are you going to call the moment you walk out of that meeting, when someone has told you basically you're not worth it, you're not, but all the work you did isn't going to be worth a promotion? and they've emphasized on everything you've done badly to prove to you you're not worth that. Because that's the process. They're going to demonstrate why they're not going to give it to you, and they're going to harp on a lot of the negatives. So who are you going to call the moment you walk out of there? How have they been prepared to receive that call and support you? What are you going to do the next 3, 4, 5 days to really get back in touch with yourself being priceless and worth and worthy? So that's the post appraisal work we do. Those are the kinds of things that, and we have like a massive toolkit of different things we do like that, because even the person you're going to call, how have they been prepared to hold space for you? Because that isn't the time that your mentor, your coach, your friend, your therapist starts to tell you quitters never win, winners never quit, right? Do you have that weekend trip in Vegas with your girlfriends already? That maybe like that's it. You take and you know you're going to go away. What is that? Because you have to have that ready, because you're going to walk out of that space. And if you're going to celebrate, same thing. Like, because even with that celebration comes fear and terror. Like, how the hell am I going to make this happen? Because I've got, I may not have the resources I need. I don't think I'm good enough, because they've given me the good feedback with a lot of like caveats. So that's probably the big thing, is we don't have any support or for the very predictable fall that's going to happen.
You make a great point, because again, a lot of the mechanisms that are set up for how do you successfully, to use your analogy by extension, how do you successfully climb the mountain? How do you get to the peak? How do you do this? How do you do that? And when it comes to DEI, it's how do you make sure this doesn't happen or that doesn't happen, or that we don't have expressions of bias or racism or whatever. How do you do all that? But no matter how many preventive steps you take, no matter how much gear you bring with you when you're climbing that mountain, there is a likelihood that you could fall or you're going to get injured. And in the examples you're using in the corporate settings, that likelihood is a lot higher sometimes than even when you're climbing a mountain with the right gear. So what preparation does the organization have, or what preparation is there for individuals to recover from that? Because it is going to happen more often than not. And I agree with you totally. That's the area where there's a big gap, because everything is set up to make sure that certain things don't happen, but there is no such thing as a guarantee that those things won't happen. So what is the fallback? How do you take that person who's now been injured and help them to regain their balance again and move forward? So that's why I think that the work that you're doing is fantastic. So talk to me a little bit about how you leverage the documentary. You started to talk about that, but give me an example. Let's say how you would use the Arise Firebird documentary to initiate a conversation that leads into that deeper discovery that helps the organization and people within it to prepare for those types of situations.
Yeah, so we have a framework called LIFT. We would say we're working with leaders, and it's really powerful if we can stratify the audience. So I'll give an example. Leaders, an example of something we could do with ERGs. So we would have they would watch the documentary, and then we would really have an initial conversation. So the LIFT, L is listen, I introspection, facilitate, and then transfer to action. So we give them time to just unpack what they've heard, listen to the documentary, what they've heard, how that affects them on a probably more superficial level and more, leadership driven conversation. When we go into the I element, which is the introspection, we're really getting them to now reflect on, for me as a leader, what are the implications of what I've seen to my team? So it's more deeper questioning. Do I really think I am chronically unique, that we don't run the risk of this? What's the implication to us from a recruitment standpoint? So even if we are the one team that's really doing good work, we are, really ahead of the curve, what are the implications recruiting from a job market where people are going to come with this experience? Because again, more likely than not, even, regardless of where they're coming from, chances are people are going to come with baggage, unless you're literally hiring babies. And that's, I believe, illegal, at least in England, to hire babies to work for you. But, so people are going to be coming with something. So we have those sessions where they now work in small groups. and begin to answer those questions and capture what the learnings are for them in terms of the implication. Then we're looking at facilitation. If they want to bring this conversation to their middle managers, their senior managers, how do they facilitate that? What are the obstacles? What is holding them back from making that next jump? Because our big desire is we want leaders to take the film and show this film and have this conversation with their managers and then managers with team leaders. So that gives ideas of what are the obstacles they have to dismantle to be able to move forward with this. And the final thing is actions. Like, what is the one action they're going to take to continue the conversation? So we really, with leaders, keep it to, at the end of the day, the one action versus an action plan or an action package, because they are also more busy than ever before. With individuals on the other extreme, we would do something around more around resiliency. So getting people to watch the film, reflect on their own experiences with this. We then would have them really kind of reframe in terms of who are they really? To reconnect, who are they actually? To remember who you are would be what we would do with those sessions. Mm-hmm. And then we'll now look at the tools we talked about, like the pre and post appraisal, like holding space as a tool. We will teach them some of the tools they can use to help them remember who they are, so that when we're now trying to take action, the last bit is going to be, what are we going to take? What are we going to do in action? They're taking action from a place of knowing who they are, not from a place of feeling hopeless, worthless, defeated, or from a place of there is something wrong with me to fix. To get them, so we take them from that space, and the film follows that same cycle of kind of rebirth, the firebird arising, and having risen. What do I do? And so our actions with the film and from the workshops is really more around, I say, true resiliency versus toxic resiliency. And I can explain that later if you want to know, but it's really around that from a place of, this is who I am. This is what I aspire to be. Here are my gifts. So how can I make actions? How can I take an action and action steps from a place of wholeness, or at least a place of greater wholeness?
For an organization, in order to make a business case for that, to me, it sounds very easy to make the business case, because I'm sure that organizations lose tons of people as a result of that. Their turnover costs go up. They lose engagement, or they lose productivity because a person who is injured or burned out somehow cannot focus that much on their job as a person who's more whole and healthy. So there's a number of ways that you can make tremendous business cases for that. Okay, so here's what I got out of this first half of our discussion with Jimi. 1, there is a toll taken even by small acts of discrimination and marginalization that can accumulate over time. In fact, micro-injuries, as I call them, inflicted on you in earlier jobs can and do follow you into future positions. Ultimately, the event that can bring you or one of your group members to your knees may seem minor to you and others, but it's the accumulation of events, not the size of any single event, that produces that result. So don't underestimate or ignore the potential impact of many small incidents. Take steps to protect yourself and your community. 2, while many organizations take steps to prevent bias and discriminatory behaviors, let's face it, they still happen. And while we want to continue taking steps to prevent bias and discrimination from hurting team members, we also need to prepare people for when it happens. 3, if your organization, like many, does not have the support structure needed to help you and your community members heal from micro-injuries so that they don't accumulate over time, consider ways you can provide these resources for yourself and your members. 4, according to Jimi, a big key to empowering individuals to confront and heal themselves from these micro-injuries before they can accumulate is to facilitate self-reflection and action-oriented planning that fosters constructive self-dialogues. For example, Jimi explains how employees can prepare to strengthen themselves before and rebuild themselves after a performance review where they expect strong pushback on their efforts to get a promotion or a raise. And finally, 5, ERG leaders who want to make a strong business case for acquiring more tools or resources to help themselves and their communities should research the current costs incurred by their company due to unwanted turnover and productivity destroying burnout. DEI and people analytics can help you secure this information. In a large company, the cost of unwanted extra turnover in undersupported communities can register in the millions. Investing a few thousands of dollars to eliminate a multi-million-dollar profitability leak can be a slam dunk business case. When we return, we will focus our discussion with Jimi on building a healthy resilience that enables us to turn the fires that would scorch us into the forges that shape us into better versions of ourselves. All this and more when we come back, but first this. I'll see you on the other side. Are you an ERG group or committee chair struggling to balance your ERG activities with your day job responsibilities? Well, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of passionate ERG leads all around the world that find themselves in the same boat. The only solution found by many is to give up lunch hours and personal time with family and friends. But there is a better way, and that better way is to master the powerful skills that enable you to 1. Set realistic and achievable compelling goals and priorities. 2. Distribute the workload by effectively delegating tasks and responsibilities to others. 3. Communicate in a way that increases your impact with less time and effort on your part. 4. Secure the full and active support of executive sponsors and other senior business leaders. And 5. Fit your ERG leadership work into a reasonable set of time boundaries. And that and more is exactly what tens of thousands of your colleagues have learned to do effortlessly by participating in Supercharge Workshops. Supercharge Workshops was developed by us along the same easy and powerful how-to framework found in our popular Supercharge Your ERGs book. The modular, customizable programs are loaded with fun exercises and tools that will immediately give you back hours of time each day while increasing your ability to achieve high impact and measurable results in both your ERG work and your job. For more details on how you can schedule a Supercharge Workshop session in your organization, go to superchargeworkshops.com. That's https:// Supercharge Workshops, one word with no spaces.com. So don't suffer silently. Take that first step towards stopping your struggle today. Check out Supercharge Workshops. Some people think resiliency is always good. It depends on the kind of resilience, but talk a little bit about that.
So I think toxic resiliency is an oxymoron, but I will tell a story. Joseph, you, me, and our partners were going to have dinner, and I decided I want to make fresh squeezed orange juice for you. So I decide I'm going to go, since you and your partner are coming at 7 p.m. I am going to go to the store and I'm going to get a bag of fresh oranges to make fresh squeezed orange juice. I walk outside my door and I can see down the street there is a driver zigzagging on the sidewalk coming my way, and that's the direction I need to go to get my orange juice. There is a school of thought around resiliency that no matter what, nothing is going to stand in my way. I'm going to go and get that orange juice for you. So I'm going to walk down that street. Quitters never win, winners never quit. And I'm going to stand my ground, and nothing's going to stop me from going down that street to get those oranges for Joseph. And then, of course, human meets vehicle. And there's real pain and damage that comes off the back of that. But at least I didn't quit. So that's actually not that's not sustainable long term. But that's what so what's the flip side for what I would say is really true resiliency? Is I see that vehicle and then I ask myself a few questions. Okay, I have options. I can wait, let it pass. I can maybe order in some boxed orange juice. Maybe there I can go to my neighbor and ask, they have oranges. Maybe I go to a store in a different direction, which means which may look to other people like walking in the opposite direction. Waiting means doing nothing, which looks like I'm not taking action. That looks like indifference. Maybe I will decide, okay, I'm not going to make orange juice. I have apples at home. I'll do something with apples instead. That looks like quitting. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm still able to have an amazing meal with my friend Joseph and his partner. We have something lovely to drink, and I haven't caused damage to myself. And that's the difference between, I would say, toxic resiliency and true resiliency. It does require, when the initial strategy seems to be a bit iffy, it's not about quitting and just say, fine, I'm just going to stay home. I'm not going to have the dinner. I'm just going to stay in my bed and cry, which is what I would have to do after I've been hit by that vehicle. Because once someone's been hit by that vehicle, there is going to be no dinner. I have to stay home and recover. So, and, that's, I guess for me, very simply the difference. And so I was never taught that part of being resilient is it's not in the moment. Resilience, especially in a career, is a long game. Mm-hmm. So it may mean I may lose out this year. I may lose out next year in the short term because I've had to walk in the opposite direction to go and look for oranges in a different supermarket. It may seem in the short term, I don't have that problem. And, Susanna down the street, she may be easily able to get those oranges because this crazy driver isn't on her road. I can't compare myself to Susanna down the street who got the oranges in no time because I just don't have that situation. So I've got to look at my own journey and understand what success really means to me.
Yeah. So you don't go out there and do things that are of injury to you and think, well, I just have to plow through it. And yet that philosophy does persist in a lot of Western society and in workplaces, that you got to get it done no matter what it takes. This is your commitment and so forth, without taking into account the human toll that happens on the other side. So give me some examples, Jimi, of what comes out of the conversations that you have. What are some of the things that people say when they watch the documentary and then you're walking them through this? What are some of the ahas that they get out of watching this and then going through the process and discussion with you? Because I would imagine it's pretty insightful.
It's a really good question, Joseph. So a couple things. We had an event with a women's group in STEM, financial services, and at the end of the conversation, they recognized their leadership recognized that they had to do more to be that safe space. They had to invest in learning how to hold space, because being a safe space, holding space is part of being a safe space, but holding space and being a safe space aren't the same thing. So they had to really, upskill, and they recognized that. So this was a big, really awareness that they had taken for granted, that just because there were women coming together, they were not necessarily holding space for each other. And so that was something that came up, was a really good realization from them and for me. We did another session with a tech company, and when having a discussion with the senior leader afterwards, they had gone and had an Arise Firebird screening and discussion with their own directors. And they had come back to find it had been a very powerful conversation, but a very difficult one. And they had now committed to continually, the three senior VPs in that region, to continue having discussions once a quarter on this. Now, once a quarter is not a lot of time, but for me, the fact that commitment came from them on their own. It wasn't part of a wider plan or a tick box exercise. They wanted to do this, to put this on their agenda, to keep talking about this, even though they had no plan of where that would take them. That for me was a really massive aha moment. They've done more since then, but getting them to get to that realization on their own is critical. And it was a great thing to see.
So We talked a little bit about ERGs earlier, which are the audience for this program, and what they can do. What are some of the different ways that ERGs can leverage these resources, like the documentary and so forth? It sounds like, from the story you just told now, that in addition to you or other people who are trained to facilitate a discussion post-screening the film, that this is something also that you teach or that other people can learn inside an organization so that they can then propagate it out to other parts of the organization. Is that the case? And is this something ERG leaders can do?
Absolutely. I mean, my love would be if ERG leaders can do this. This frees me up to make more films, Joseph, because we do want to keep making films that advocate and celebrate underrepresented stories in the workplace. So, I mean, the biggest way, the easiest way, the most straightforward way would be to have a screening to have a viewing within their organization, and then to do like a workshop or a discussion. And we can provide support for ERG leaders to be able to lead that themselves. I think the biggest thing would be to stratify your audience. So we're doing something for leaders separately from what we do for, say, everybody, a town hall type viewing or screening event. That's one. I think the second thing I would say in terms of how we could leverage would be really working on our toolkit. So things like the pre and post appraisal, how learning how to hold space post very difficult work situations, tools such as I would call the problem solving meeting, which is where a person comes in and actually with a bit of a structure, we really take them through a very complex work problem, from a place of wholeness and support. That is something that we do teach leaders to do. And I think that ERG leaders being able to do that and being able to help their membership use those tools with each other as well as leaders is definitely what we are really hoping to do, because it goes back to your initial point around, helping people post. On one hand, we're doing a lot of leadership empowerment equipping, which is essential, but where people do end up falling and getting bruised for whatever reason, understand it could be a wound from before they joined the company that's now acting up. Mm-hmm. That knee, that my knee is acting up again. How do we help them in this space, bring them back to a wholeness of who they are? So there's definitely a range of different ways that can be done. And yes, we can. It is something that can be taught to those that really care about it to be able to propagate to others.
That's fabulous. So you talk about conducting conversations and facilitating discussions. So there are some skills there. What are some other skills that someone has to have to really be good at this? Do you teach that, or are those things that someone who's going to do this should come with a certain foundation in place in order to be effective in supplying that type of support to their community members?
I think the first thing they would need to have done is to have used these for themselves. Because that brings in a space around humility, around what actually is needed. We find a lot of the tools that we think about, I think from a coaching standpoint, which I think are great, I think of coaching and training, they're not the same. And I know they aren't. So, but I'm going to blur the lines a little bit. There's this space around, we need people to almost like guide them a little bit into a certain way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so with training, we're a bit more directive. With coaching, maybe we might be less directive, but there's still somewhere we're trying to get them to get to an answer, because we know the answers in them. So what we're talking about here is probably a bit more from, I'll say, the 12-step spaces, where the answer may not be within you. And even in this conversation, we may not get to an answer. But the process is actually more important than the destination. Mm-hmm. And to know that eventually we'll get to that answer. So having done it for oneself, you can be more comfortable. Let's say we're doing a problem solving for someone who's having difficulty at work. We may not, in the 1 hour we spend with that person, necessarily say, okay, I'll do these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. They may come up with one thing. They may come up with, actually, all I can do right now is take care of my own mental health and and focus on self-care. It may not be what we thought we'd come out with in that space. It may be I just have to sit with this and think about it a bit longer from those spaces. So I think the number one thing is having gone through it themselves for themselves. They can see that process. I think the second thing is patience. This is going to take the time it takes. It doesn't mean that you have to kind of finish the whole process before you start seeing improvements. Absolutely not. But to recognize that it's not going to happen on your timeline in terms of someone's wellness. I think the third skill is for organizations, you're doing this within an organization, having an awareness of the resources your company provides in terms of employee assistance programs or beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's also really important to be able to have that at the forefront, that, please do check these resources out because they're really, really important. I think the final thing is self-compassion with oneself as you're helping someone through this space, recognizing that you may not be able to help them. They may not want your help. And so having that compassion that it's not personal. And I may feel bad about it. And that's okay to feel bad because we're human. But to be kind to yourself in feeling bad about those things.
Great advice. So how can our listeners get to screen the documentary? What's the process for doing that?
So what I would suggest is, if you'd like us to bring Arise Firebird into your organization, to reach out to us on arisefirebird.com. That's the primary way it can be made available. And we can then make it available largely virtually, primarily virtually, I'll be honest, for screening events in that way. And then we would come and help set up whether the screening, whatever discussions and workshops we'd want to have. We can definitely help you, give you some ideas about what that could look like, or I could come in also and support in some of those conversations directly.
Fantastic. And are there other resources, Jimmy, that you also offer ERG leaders or that you can recommend, whether it's audiobooks or written books, studies, anything that you can offer in addition that helps people to mentally wrap their heads around this notion of how to take better care of themselves and perhaps even help others through the experience that they gain from these tools?
The one book, a couple of books come to mind. One is Rest is Resilience. Absolutely amazing book. And I read that. I think I've read it every year since it's been out. So I'm going to read it again today. It's a really good book. Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. Also, in terms of being present. And I think the last book I would recommend is, I'm trying to think one that isn't too controversial. Isn't too controversial. So a book that I would read is a book called Range by David Epstein. And why this book is really powerful is, I think the conclusion from his book is nothing is lost. So, because a lot of us were working with people, I know from my own experience, people of color, professional women of color, really gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual professionals often tend to be more qualified. They tend to overqualify, over-index, move around, change jobs more often because it's hard to stay in an unpleasant environment. And what I like about this book is it talks about how that range of experience can actually be used in your advantage in your career. And people who have that range, if they, as they continue, it's going to pay off later. We just don't know when or how. And statistically, it shows that it does. And knowing that when you're talking to somebody who may have got passed over, or who didn't get the pay rise or lost an opportunity, even though everything else was right, is perfect, knowing that their lives are not their lives aren't necessarily over because of that. There's going to be overtaking is allowed in the future. We just don't know where or when. And this book is really powerful for giving that context.
That's excellent. Thank you. And that all ties together with the whole theme of Arise Firebird, the phoenix coming back from the ashes. I love that metaphor. That's fantastic. Jimmy, how can our listeners reach you personally?
If they can email me at Jimmy at Fola Jimmy Worldwide, and I'm sure that will be somewhere for them to reach out. Or there is, my email is on the website arisefirebird.com. They can also reach me on LinkedIn, Jimi Okubanjo at LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from them all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jimmy, for joining us today on ERG Power Talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Joseph. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Okay, here's what I got out of the second part of my discussion with Jimmy. 1, beware of trying to be resilient without understanding the difference between toxic and healthy resilience. Toxic resilience involves pushing through regardless of the consequences to yourself, while healthy resilience involves adapting yourself and making informed choices to move forward while protecting your well-being. 2, instead of blindly persisting in the face of obstacles, assess your options and adapt your approach. Recognize when it's necessary to change course or seek alternative solutions to achieve your goals without causing harm to yourself. 3, focus on sustainable strategies rather than short-term perseverance. Recognize that true resilience extends beyond immediate challenges and involves making decisions that support long-term well-being and success. 4, encourage open dialogue and introspection within your community to address personal challenges. Turn your communities into safe spaces for discussions that empower your members to engage in meaningful conversations that lead to greater self-awareness and positive, healthy choices. 5, equip yourself as ERG leaders with the tools and resources to facilitate discussions and effectively support yourselves and your community members. Look for training and resources on holding safe spaces and problem solving. Also explore with HR what organizational resources for mental health and well-being are available to you and your members. And finally, 6, make it part of your ERG work to take yourself and your members on a journey of continuous learning and personal development to enhance your healthy resilience and career success. Perhaps you can acquire, read, and discuss some of the books Jimmy recommended on resilience, presence, and embracing diversity of experience to foster growth of mindset and adaptability. I love the title of Jimmy's documentary, Arise, Firebird, because it reminds me of the ancient tale of the phoenix. The phoenix is a mythical bird from ancient folklore associated with rebirth and renewal. According to legend, the phoenix is a majestic bird that lives for several centuries before igniting itself into flames and being consumed by fire. From its ashes, a new phoenix arises, symbolizing regeneration and immortality. There are many versions of this story of the phoenix. One of the most famous fables about the phoenix comes from Greek mythology. According to this tale, the phoenix lives near a cool well in Arabia. Every 500 years, when the phoenix becomes old and tired as it nears the end of its life cycle, it builds a nest of aromatic branches and spices and ignites it with the sun's rays. As the nest burns, the phoenix is consumed by flames, but it is reborn from its own ashes, emerging as a young, vibrant bird. This new phoenix then carries the ashes of its predecessor to the city of Heliopolis in Egypt, where it deposits them at the altar of the sun god. The story of the phoenix has been embraced by various cultures throughout history, each adding its own interpretations and symbolism. But overall, the fable serves as a powerful metaphor for renewal, resilience, and the cyclical and indestructible nature of life. My modern interpretation of the story is that it's a metaphor for how the fires we face in life, properly moderated and leveraged, will usher in the new and better you. The key to having the fire create a better version of us rather than destroy us lies in our preparation before we enter the fire and after we leave it. I hope the lessons you drew from this program help you turn the fires in your life into the tools of a forge that continuously rebuilds you and your communities into more robust and powerful versions of yourselves. Thank you for tuning in to ERG Power Talk. If you enjoyed and got value out of this program, please like us and leave a favorable review at your podcast provider's site. Also, invite others to listen to the show. By the way, contact me if you're looking for an ERG Symposium keynote or a leader for your strategy workshop, new chair onboarding, and or ERG bootcamp. I can run these for you either in person or in a virtual setting. Also, for more great ideas and tips for your ERGs, get my books, Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy, and the new DEI and ERG Frontier, how you and your efforts can rise and thrive in the new world of constant disruption. Both available on Amazon.com. I'm Joe Santana. Thanks again for tuning in.